Shadow Secretary of State, Darren.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm starting to worry about Right Honourable and Honourable members of the Conservative Party opposite. Not just because there are so few of them here today to defend their budget, but because of their state of mind. I'm not sure whether it is confusion, delusion, or denial. But whatever it is, I think they need an intervention from the public. On Conservative confusion, the Chancellor called this a tax-cutting budget. But the independent forecasts confirm that the tax burden is due to go up in each and every year of the next 5 years. On Conservative delusion, the Chancellor called this a budget for a long-term plan for growth. But in the middle of this recession, the growth forecast per person was downgraded once again after 7 quarters of previous decline. And on Conservative denial, the worst of the 3 examples, the Conservative Party came out of the budget promising to abolish national insurance contributions altogether. An irresponsible, unfunded, massive spending commitment costing £46 billion a year, and all without a plan to pay for it. Now, I know that the Conservative ministers don't like to think about their 4th Prime Minister since 2010, who only recently crashed the economy off the back of unfunded tax cuts, sending mortgage bills rocketing. But they really do not need to look back far in history to understand the risks of a £46 billion unfunded tax cut promise. They don't even need to ask their predecessors what the consequences are of such risky behaviour, because the British people are still paying the price today for their economic vandalism with higher mortgage and rent costs every single month. Conservative ministers need to look at themselves in the mirror and ask, have they learnt anything from the last 14 years in office? Madam Deputy Speaker, these are just a few examples of confusion, delusion, denial and risk-taking with the economy that prove that the biggest threat to the economy is the Conservative Party itself. Now, moving to the confusion about this budget being a tax-cutting budget. The budget documents confirm that the United Kingdom has the highest tax burden in 70 years, rising each and every year for the next 5 years under the Conservatives. This means that overall taxes are going up, not down. Figures from the Office of Budget Responsibility show that for every 10 pence extra in tax paid by working people under the Conservatives, they're now giving only 5 pence back. This is why the public see it as a pre-election giveaway from the Conservative Party, but it's no giveaway at all, Madam Deputy Speaker, given that successive Conservative chancellors have taken double what they're now promising to give back. But this isn't just bad news for those paying taxes already. Because tax thresholds are being frozen for the next 5 years, increasing the tax take overall by an additional £40 billion, 3.7 million people, including pensioners, who are not currently paying tax at all, will be doing so by 28-29 under the Conservatives. With the tax burden going up, with Conservative ministers taking more in taxes than they now say they're giving back, and with more people paying tax than before this budget, I have to question, why are Conservative ministers calling this a tax-cutting budget at all? May I also gently point out, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the SNP are just as bad. In Scotland, the SNP has increased taxes on working people so that even the low-paid are now paying more in tax in Scotland than they would in England. And yet they campaign against a windfall tax on the big oil and gas companies. Are they really putting the oil and gas company tax cuts ahead of tax cuts on working people? Yeah. Labour first called for a windfall tax on the profits of oil and gas companies in January 2022. The Conservatives finally agreed to introduce the energy profits levy in May of that year, though there were significant holes in the government's approach. And since then, we on this side have been pressing ministers to close them. Ahead of the general election, we have set out our plans for the energy profits levy if we win. We will increase the levy to the same rate of tax as in Norway, end the windfall tax investment allowances, and maintain the levy until the end of the next Parliament with a statutory sunset clause, provided there continue to be windfall profits. We have set out our plans now to give those operating in the North Sea as much certainty as possible over their future investment decisions. And to give further certainty, I can put on the record today that we fully support having an energy security investment mechanism in place, and we will therefore support Budget Resolution 18 today. Let's now turn to the delusion of this budget being a so-called long-term plan for growth. The independent evidence is clear. This will be the worst Parliament on record for living standards. the only parliament where living standards have fallen instead of risen, with real pay, as my honourable friend has pointed out, only having gone up £17 a week under the Conservatives compared to £183 a week under the last Labour government. And whilst the Chancellor couldn't bring himself to say the R word, the budget documents confirmed that after 22 budgets or statements from successive Conservative Chancellors these past 14 years, in each they promised they would get the economy growing, and where are we now? In recession. A recession that for working people has been felt for some time. 7 quarters of downgraded growth per person, extended by a further downgrade in the budget last week. The longest period of stagnation since the 1950s, an economy that has shrunk on a per capita basis since the Prime Minister took office, and overall GDP only forecast to increase because of a dependence on migrant labour. That's quite the record for a Conservative Party that promised to reduce migration and get the economy growing. To the denial of the Conservative Party, its £46 billion a year plan to abolish national insurance contributions altogether. An irresponsible, unfunded, massive spending commitment, and all without a plan to pay for it. The public rightly look to their national insurance contributions as the bedrock of our welfare state, where working people and their employers all contribute towards funding our National Health Service and the state pension. Originally designed as an insurance, giving people the financial help they need during illness and unemployment. Now, given the Conservative Party's pledge, confirmed again across the dispatch box today, to abolish national insurance altogether, without a plan to pay for the £46 billion a year cost of doing so, I must ask, what do Conservatives propose to cut? Will it be funding for our GPs, driving patients to pay for private health care? Will it be the right to be seen in your local hospital? Maybe they'll cut support towards the cost of social care, an end to incapacity benefit, an end to job seekers allowance, maybe even a reduction in the state pension itself. What is it? What is it? The public have a right to know, and I will happily give way to an intervention from ministers opposite if they can tell us how they're going to fund their £46 billion tax cut. There are no interventions, Madam Deputy Speaker, so I may have to move on. The Conservative Party must answer this question. They must answer this question. After their previous Prime Minister and their previous Chancellor crashed the economy from a £45 billion tax cut, they're now celebrating the latest form from this Conservative Party of a £46 billion tax cut. How will it be funded? Surely not through higher taxes or higher borrowing, given that both are at record highs already. We can only assume, given taxes are the highest they have been for 70 years, that borrowing is the highest it has been for many decades. We can only assume that there must be further cuts coming from the Conservative Party to our National Health Service and our state pension. The fact of the matter, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that the Conservatives' plan to abolish national insurance is not just fiscally irresponsible, it is morally abhorrent. And in contrast, the Labour Party will never promise to do anything it cannot pay for. Madam Deputy Speaker, I seem to have woken them up on the benches opposite, and I encourage them to continue to try to answer the questions we put to them. Madam Deputy Speaker, I started this debate today by highlighting my concern for Conservative ministers. Given their obvious state of confusion, delusion and quite obviously denial, but my real concern is elsewhere. My concern is for working people paying more in tax than ever before, for pensioners dragged into paying tax out of their fixed incomes for the first time, for families struggling with the cost of living crisis and seeing the economy going in the wrong direction, for our National Health Service, now presumably at threat from the £46 billion unfunded promise to abolish national insurance contributions with no plan for how to pay for it, and for our country, which after 14 years of failure from the Conservatives is exhausted, on its knees and staring into the abyss. We are all fed up, Madam Deputy Speaker, with the weak leadership the latest Conservative Prime Minister is offering our country. We are bored to the back teeth of the chaos and infighting in the Conservative Party taking priority over the country. We want to get our economy back on track, our public services back on their feet, to close the book on 14 years of Conservative failure and to get Britain its future back. And so I only have one ask of the Conservative Party today, Madam Deputy Speaker: set the date for the general election.